You're listening to SM Media, the #1 place for exclusive content.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of The Interview right here on SM Media. I'm Scott McPike, delighted to be your host as always. We have a very special guest in this week's episode. I'm delighted to be joined by former Aberdeen, former Rangers, former Dundee United and Scotland international, Stephen Wright. Stephen, it's a pleasure to welcome you on to the show. Thanks very much for coming on.
Pleasure, Scott. Happy to be here.
Brilliant. How are we?
Very good, thanks. Yeah, very good.
Brilliant. Obviously, as well, you've spent a bit of time in coaching since you stopped playing football. Like, you're obviously now at Dundee. Like, how's it been since COVID and getting back into the swing of things? What's it been like the past couple of months?
Yeah, it's been tough. Obviously, 18 months ago when it first hit, it was kind of unprecedented. Nobody knew what to do. And actually speaking about that this morning, we're doing a lot of Zoom sessions like we're doing now with the young players, and because you go from these boys training 3 nights a week and having games at the weekend to absolutely nothing. The boys weren't allowed to leave their house, etc. And so we're just trying to keep in touch with them and just have a variety of different topics on Zoom that you can do. I mean, we're actually quite creative. We managed to do quite a bit and even managed to do some technique with the ball when you've got maybe 20 players on the Zoom call in the front room with a ball and doing things like that. And we did some tactical analysis. We did, workouts as well, and also maybe we had some guests as well coming on and explaining, ex-players that have maybe played the game and maybe current players. So we're actually very lucky to get that, and then we get back into it again later in the year and get back to the training, which was great for everybody. And then obviously the second lockdown hit. So again, you just try and adapt and do as best we can. So now we're almost out of it, although it's kind of not going away at the moment, but we're obviously being very careful, and it's good to get all the players and just everybody in general just back and enjoying sport again and doing the things that they love.
Yeah, definitely. We'll touch a bit on your career to start with. Obviously, you grew up in Hamilton and then ended up going to Aberdeen, where a really good youth team with likes of Ian Jess and Scott Booth were in it. What were your kind of memories of coming through at Aberdeen?
Signing a schoolboy form when I was 13 was pretty special. I was still playing boys club, and old S forums that anybody can remember. The S forums which they were your boys club, whilst you would be attached to a senior club. So before I signed an S form, I was training with Dundee and Aberdeen at the same time. So once a month you would go and train with Dundee up in Dundee and train with Aberdeen, but that was down in Glasgow with and Alex Ferguson and Archie Knox, believe it or not, used to come down and take us one night a month. So we did that while still playing our boys club. And then when I got to the end of 4th year, I was lucky enough to be invited up to start an apprenticeship at Aberdeen. And I mean, that was brilliant, just a young lad. And I was from Hamilton, as you said, and being driven up the road by my mum and my dad, my sister, and dropped off at digs. And then they're away back down the road, my mum's in floods of tears. And, that's me. That's starting my football career and very young. But I had a good kind of mentor at the start because I shared a room with Paul Wright. Aberdeen fans will remember Paul Wright. So he took me under his wing for the first year. I stayed in digs with him. And then I kind of, as you said, luckily enough, I had a good team of young players, and managed to get myself into the reserves fairly early. And then again, kind of progressed through into the first team, and then moved around the city of Aberdeen, which I absolutely loved. It was a great place to live and a great place to start my young kind of career.
Brilliant. You spent obviously 5 years in the first team, made over 100 appearances. What were your kind of favourite memories being involved in the first team, and who were kind of some of the really good players you played with?
Fantastic players. Some of the young players that you mentioned, like Ian Jess, Scott Booth, Gary Smith, Michael Watt, Greg Watson, Graham Watson, all of these guys that I grew up with. Andy Gibson came as well, these guys I'm still friendly with at the moment. And then obviously, we were all changing in the away dressing room at that point, all the reserves and the young players. And you'd be terrified to go into the home dressing room because Willie Miller's there and Alex McPike and Jim Bett, Stuart McKimmie, all these guys that you kind of you look up to. And but they were great. Experienced players were great, and you know, I was very lucky to actually break into the first team of the reserves when you're playing alongside some of these guys. You know, I remember playing reserve games against the likes of Peter Grant, Davy Cooper when he was come back from injury. You know, and I'm sharing the pitch with these guys. That was a brilliant education for me. Highlights would probably be making my debut at Pittodrie against St Mirren. Myself and Scott Booth, it was a double substitution. We came on, I think it was Charlie Nicholas actually that came off. We came on at nothing each. I think it was probably about in the second half. So we ended up winning 2-0. So me and Scott Booth were taking the credit. I think Scott might actually, I'm not sure if he scored or if he had an assist. So that was my debut against St Mirren. And then I was a sub the following week down at Parkhead. And then that was the lead up to the famous Scottish Cup win when it went to penalties.
Yeah.
So I didn't make the squad for that. But I got a taste of the first team, you know, the few weeks prior to that. And then the year after that, I was lucky enough to make my debut and kind of pretty much stayed in the team after that. You know, I remember Alex Smith playing me at right back because Stuart McKimmie was out for quite a long time. So again, the misfortune of Stuart was my kind of good fortune, and I came in and you know, lucky enough I stayed in the team. Alex kept me in the team, and I kind of never looked back after that. So lots of highs, you know, playing full houses at Pittodrie, going down and doing well in Glasgow, which was always, you know, we never probably had the record that, you know, Sir Alex Ferguson had prior to that, but we actually did really well against Celtic and Rangers. And then obviously getting involved in cup finals and league deciders. A league decider at Ibrox was probably the biggest game that I've ever been involved in. Even though I was a young player at the time, I probably didn't know the extent of that game. You know, it hurt everybody. I mean, Aberdeen fans still speak about it to this day, and so do the players. But that was probably, I would say, not the highlight, probably in terms of the magnitude of the game. It's probably the biggest game I've played in. Right. And also probably the biggest disappointment as well was not managing to win the league that day. So many highs.
Brilliant. Yeah, obviously your kind of success at Aberdeen got you a place in the Scotland team as well. You obviously played 15 games in under-21s, then played twice for the senior team. What was your memories of pulling on your shirt for your country?
Great. Yeah, I loved playing with the Scotland under-21s. We had some great players and some great games as well. Again, the one at Pittodrie probably sticks out, and it was, I think it was, we won 4-3 against Germany. It was maybe West Germany at that point. Alex Ray scored the winner near the end, and it was a full house at Pittodrie, and I think that was a quarter final of the European Championships, and we got to the semi-final against Sweden and we lost. But some great players I grew up with, the Scotland under-21s, and we always had a fair contingent of Aberdeen boys in the Scotland under-21s. There was myself and Gary, and there was Ian, there was Scott, there was Michael. So you know, a lot of familiar faces, and then guys obviously that went on and have great careers as well. And then after that, you know, some Scotland caps as well. Scotland caps against Germany. Ibrox was one game that was my first game for the senior team. And then I played in a European Championship game away at Estonia. We won 3-1 in. So that was a massive highlight of my career, was playing a couple of times for my country, and I'll never forget that.
Brilliant. You then obviously moved to Rangers. When did you first hear that Rangers were interested in you?
I kind of knew they were watching. You know, you hear things, you get rumours, and that Rangers were watching, and I used to get wound up by some of our players that, you know, Walter Smith's in the stand watching you and different things. And but at that time, I think Blackburn Rovers and Newcastle, there was rumours as well that they were watching me. But I was probably that preoccupied because that was the year that we didn't have a good season with Aberdeen. Mm-hmm. And we ended up in the playoffs. That was a relegation playoff. So really preoccupied with that. My sort of contract was coming to an end as well. And then, you know, after that game, we managed to survive and we stayed up. And then obviously Rangers came in, and it was a deal that was done. So I didn't really have anything to do with it. You know, it was Rangers wanted to buy me. and Aberdeen probably couldn't have stood in my way, and I chose to sign for Rangers. So it was a big decision, and I know it's happened in the past, and it's happened, and it's happened since that players have gone from Aberdeen to Rangers, and vice versa as well. Players have gone from Rangers to Aberdeen. There's obviously been a few recently. So to leave a club at Aberdeen was a big thing for me. But to then go and play for Rangers in the Champions League, and they were kind of regulars in the Champions League at those points, and qualifiers and then the game. So that was a big moment for me as well.
Yeah, definitely. Was that a dream move to go to Rangers?
Probably was. I mean, I grew up as a young kid in Hamilton, supporting Rangers. My dad was a Rangers fan as well, so I suppose it was a bit of a dream. But when you look back to when I was at Aberdeen, people always think you supported Rangers as a kid when you moved to Aberdeen, and you used to get stick about it. But when you play for a team, you don't really support anybody. You actually support that club you play for. You give everything to that club you play for, whether it was Bradford City, who I went to later on in my career. You'd give everything for Bradford City. You support Bradford City. So, so when I moved to Rangers, it probably was a bit of a dream because I did grow up. My dad grew up. My family were all Rangers fans. And then obviously sharing the dressing room with some of these kind of massive figures that I'd played against, and Paul Gascoigne signed a few days after I signed as well. Yeah. So to share dressing rooms with these guys was a bit of a dream of mine.
And then obviously you touch on the dressing room as well. Like obviously characters like McCoy, Durant, Ian Ferguson as well. There was a lot of characters. Like what was the kind of memories of that dressing room? Just how good was it to be in that dressing room at that time?
Oh, it was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. I mean, some of the stories you probably couldn't repeat, and some of the stories McCoy has still been speaking about to this day with Paul Gascoigne. But they kind of made you feel welcome from day one. I think the day I signed, I had bought myself what I thought was quite a smart 3-piece suit with a waistcoat on it. So obviously I got absolutely hammered the minute I walked into the changing room after I'd signed. McCoy and Durant thought they'd signed some sort of LA lawyer because I'd walked in with this 3-piece suit on, never been seen before. So that was it. And then, as you said, the characters they had on, and great players at that time. And there was loads of stories with Paul Gascoigne, which I mean, I got on pretty well with Paul, and he actually used to come and play snooker with me up in Newton Mearns where I used to live. So good memories of him. He was just daft as a brush, absolutely crazy. He used to borrow his car at the weekends because he had this big fancy BMW that nobody had ever seen before. So it was between me and Charlie Miller. We used to ask him for the keys, and we just used to take it for the weekend. I'd go up and see my in-laws in Aberdeen in this big fancy flash car. So some good memories and some good people as well.
And obviously, like Walter Smith's obviously the manager at this point. Just how good a manager was Walter Smith? Yeah,
very good. I mean, I suppose at that point he had a successful team and they were winning. They were obviously winning the league and doing really well in Europe. So, it was a case of, I mean, you've got likes of Brian Laudrup's, Paul Gascoigne, and these top players that it was probably just a case of managing these guys and making sure. I think probably his job was making sure these guys didn't hit the front pages of the newspapers, never mind the back pages.
Yeah.
And probably as long as we're performing at the weekends, then that was the job done. But I don't know how he managed to manage some of these characters because it must have been tough for him to manage and keep them in the straight and narrow. But it was great fun, great times. And I got injured. I didn't play many games for Rangers, but the fact that I went and experienced that, and obviously playing in front of Rangers fans, playing in Old Firm, a couple of Old Firm games as well was great experiences for me too.
Yeah, definitely. You touched on your injury as well. Obviously, you picked that up in the game against Juventus in your first season. Just how hard was that to pick up that injury and recover from that?
Yeah, that was a tough one. I'd had a few little niggly knee operations when I was at Aberdeen.
Right.
You're back in 6 weeks, back in 8 weeks. But this was a more serious one. This was my cruciate ligament, and wasn't as common as it is nowadays. Usually the recovery is about 7 or 8 months. So so yeah, I did that. I didn't know I did it on the night because it was on the pitch. It was Ibrox, and I just kind of remember my studs had caught in the turf and my whole body had twisted, and I just felt something going. Obviously get scanned, and then you realise it's your anterior cruciate ligament's been snapped. So at that point, Rangers actually had quite a few cruciate ligaments. I think Ian Durrant obviously had a few knee injuries, and Stuart McCall, Andy Gorham, a lot of these guys, and they'd sent them to the States. So I'd gone to the States with my wife and got this operation in LA, and a nice recuperation in Palm Springs as well, which was good for my wife. It wasn't great for me because I'm laid up with a big knee brace on. So 10 days in Palm Springs after the operation in LA. So and then managed to get myself obviously back, and months and months of rehab. And I was always listening. There was always players injured, so there was plenty of company. I think I was probably the longest term injury. But lots of hard work in the early mornings and spending time with the physio as you do. And then I got back. So that happened in November. I got back in maybe the May, June, and then did the pre-season again, and it snapped again. So again, back to LA. Exact same procedure again, although I did a different operation in my knee. And then I was out for another 7 months. And then I got back at the turn of the year, and then managed to get a few games under my belt, but I never felt the same when I got back. I lost a bit of pace, and it took me a while to get my confidence back. And then my third season at Rangers was tough to get in, because Rangers had then, at that time they were signing players every year, so it made my job even more difficult. So, with trying to get back from injury, playing reserve football, then going on loan, then I kind of knew my time was up at Rangers. But after that, I went to Bradford City, which was brilliant. I absolutely loved that, because you obviously think your kind of career's going down a little bit of a decline after that. But Bradford City was brilliant. I absolutely loved it. Great teammates again, and I'd probably the highlight of my career was at Bradford on the pitch. Yeah, because I was involved in obviously the promotion to the Premiership. Had a really good season that year, and I think it was League One at the time, but it's the equivalent of the Championship now in England. So I was really lucky, back fit. I probably wasn't never the player I was, back in Aberdeen days. Maybe lost a yard of pace, but I really enjoyed my time at Bradford, and we had quite a successful season. Yeah, definitely. Obviously, Stuart McCall was there as well. Was that kind of a big reason you went down, like just to reunite with him? It was, and Stuart always reminds me of that. He took me down to be his gardener. I wasn't getting down as a player. So he'd actually said to me, he said to the manager at the time, Paul Jewell, that why don't you have a look at me, because I was at the end of my career at Rangers. I was at home, didn't have a club, and I went down in trial first and foremost to Bradford. So I had to go down and kind of prove myself to the manager, and luckily enough, I managed to get a 2-year contract at Bradford. So I think Stuart always tells people to this day that I went down just to be his gardener. So. Brilliant. You obviously have 2 years at Bradford, then you come back up to Scotland with Dundee United. Was that more kind of looking at the coaching aspect of the game? Like, how did it come about that you come back to Dundee United? No. Again, my contract expired at Bradford. I had two. My wife we had twins just when I'd moved to Bradford, so they were just 1-2 years old. Didn't really have a club out, a few trials down in England, and then Alex Smith phoned me, who was manager at Dundee United. He got the job at Dundee United, and he said to me, "Do you fancy coming back up the road and coming to Dundee United?" So no, I'd gone as a player. Coaching hadn't crossed my mind at that point. Right. So signed for Dundee United. Keep that quiet, seeing as I'm now sitting in the Dundee boardroom telling you about this. Good players, good management team. In fact, a great management team in Alex Smith and John Blackley, Paul Hegarty, Maurice Malpass, Dundee United legends. So coming to the end of my career, I really enjoyed the coaching that we got, and obviously knew Alex Smith very well from Aberdeen days. But again, I was picking up lots of niggly injuries, knee injuries, and I was getting to the point where I was getting a bit fed up. So Alec then lost his job, and then I kind of wondered what to do, and I thought, well, Alec had always said to me to try and do your coaching badges while you were still playing. So I went down to Largs and did my A licence, did my youth licence, just whilst I was kind of in and out of the team and playing reserves. And then after that, I had to make a decision whether or not I was going to carry on. I was 31 at the time. I was getting fed up with my knees. I was getting used to not playing on a Saturday.
Yeah.
And I thought, right, now is the time. So I made that decision. I started doing some coaching down at Rangers in the academy because I knew George Adams, funny enough, who was one of my first coaches at Aberdeen. It's amazing how football world works. It goes full circle. So George is one of my first coaches, him and Lenny Taylor. When we used to go up as S forums to Aberdeen when I was 13, 14 years old, George and Lenny would take us. And then George then became academy manager at Rangers. He took me down there, did some community programmes, and then worked in the academy. So from then, I've been coaching since I was kind of 31, 32 years old.
Yeah, definitely. You obviously spent time at Rangers, Dunfermline. You've been at the likes of Cowdenbeath and East Fife as well. Like, what was the kind of memories of your first kind of few years of coaching?
Probably the. You know, always look at first team players now that are coming to the end of their career and, you know, going straight into management or straight into first team coaching. I always think it's best to go and get an education and work in even a community programme or even an academy, working with young kids, 11, 12 years old. You know, because if you want to be a coach, it's always good to go and make mistakes whilst you're working with young kids, because they don't know know you're making a mistake. You know, whether you're trying to pick teams at training and you've got an odd number, kids don't pick up on it. Whereas if you go from, you know, straight into a first team changing room to be a coach, first team players are on you right away because they know exactly. So that was probably the best thing for me, was to go and work in a community programme at Rangers where you're dealing with 5 and 6 year old boys and girls and trying to organise them and put them into teams and do some coaching. And that was great for me. It was an education for me. It's hard work, don't get me wrong, it was tough, but and then obviously moving into the academy, which was a little bit more structured at Rangers, and I kind of worked my way up after that. So that pathway suited me in terms of working younger ones and then working all the way up. And then the shot, as you mentioned, at Dunfermline, Jim McIntyre took me as first team coach. Yeah. Again, good coaches, Jerry McCabe and Jim, and a good team at that point. And then there was a vacancy as a head of youth at Dunfermline. So I took that, and then since then I've always been kind of in charge of the academy. So Dunfermline, and then they be amalgamated with the Fife clubs to bring Fife Academy together, and then back to Rangers full time in the academy, and then obviously an opportunity at Dundee came up, so I've taken that.
Yeah, how much are you enjoying that, and who's some of the good players that have kind of come through in the past couple of years at Dundee?
Great job, really enjoying it. Good club. Great. The team have now been promoted. So, you know, in terms of the PR of the club and you know, everything in the city, obviously Dundee United were up the year before. So now you've got the 2 Dundee clubs in the Premiership, which is fantastic for the city. And Dundee have had a rich history of bringing players through. Yeah. You know, the players that have come through in the past, even back in the sort of Benetti days or even before that. I mean, when I used to play against Dundee youth teams, you likes of Stevie Campbell's of this world and Paul Mathers, they always had good players coming through. And then years later, the likes of Scott Robertson, who I'm now working with at Dundee, and Lee Wilkies, Lee Mayers, all these sort of guys that have come through. So they've had a rich history of players coming through, and you know, at the moment there's some players who are in and around the first team just now that are doing well. Obviously, Cammy Kerr is one that I didn't work with Cammy, but he comes and helps the academy. Great lad, and Dundee through and through, and he's worked his way right through the academy up into the first team, and there's a few boys trying to follow in his footsteps, like Max Anderson's doing well just now, Finlay Robertson, Lyle Cameron, Josh Mulligan. There's a few boys that are starting to come through, so it can only give the rest of the academy a little bit of hope to see that.
Yeah, definitely. Are you all right closing with some quick fire questions?
Of course.
Brilliant. Who would you say would be the best player you ever played with?
Paul Gascoigne.
Do you see best character as well?
Best character. I mean, him and Brian Laudrup were probably the best 2 players, and I'd probably put Jim Bett as a third. Right. Jim Bett, what a player Jim Bett was. Absolutely fantastic. So probably they 3. I know you asked for one, but Jim Bett, Paul Gascoigne and Brian Laudrup, not a bad 3.
Brilliant. Best player you played against?
I would probably say Davy Cooper because he was my hero growing up. One of my first games for Aberdeen, I was directly against him. He was at Motherwell. He knew I was from Hamilton because I'd met him before because my dad knew his dad.
Right.
And he talked me through the whole game. And I was right back. He was left wing and he was brilliant. And I still couldn't get the ball off him, but it was brilliant just to play against him. So he's probably my favourite player to ever play against. But I've played against some really good players.
Yeah, definitely. Favourite away ground you've ever played at?
Obviously the big grounds are good, but I had a really good record at the Old Brockville.
Right.
I used to enjoy playing there. It was really tight knit. The stands were right on top of you. Falkirk fans were always on your case. Aberdeen fans were always good as well there. So I had a really good record. So I probably would enjoy that the most.
Brilliant. Favourite film?
My kids wind me up because I'm always watching Con Air.
Right.
Something about it. I just love the characters in Con Air, but probably one of the comedies which would have to be Planes, Trains and Automobiles.
Very good. Favourite football in memory?
It's a tough one, actually. Don't really know. Probably making my Scotland debut would have to be there. Yeah, Scotland debut against Germany at Ibrox. Biggest game, yeah, against when Germany had won the World Cup. So they were the world champions playing that night. So that was a big highlight.
Brilliant. Best friend in football?
Probably Jamie Fullerton.
Right.
I played with Jamie latterly at Dundee United, and just played with him in some of the Scotland youth teams. So he's one that I've grown up in football, and I probably speak to him once or twice a week.
Brilliant. Final question. Best manager you played under?
Alex Smith.
Brilliant. Stephen, it's been an absolute pleasure to be on the show. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you.